Dante Moretti was a ghost story told to scare rival families into submission. He had left a trail of bodies from Brooklyn to Palermo, and his name alone could silence a room. But the one thing the most feared mafia boss alive didn't expect was for a 26-year-old maid to point a gun at his chest and whisper two words that would save his life. "Don't move." The Miami negotiations were supposed to take 3 days. They collapsed in 6 hours when the Colombians tried to renegotiate terms mid-deal. Dante Moretti didn't renegotiate. He made examples. The blood on his Brioni suit wasn't his own, and that was all that mattered. He bypassed his usual security protocols when he returned to the penthouse. It was past midnight, and exhaustion had settled into his bones like lead. The building's private elevator opened directly into his foyer. Oh, but something was wrong the moment the doors slid apart. The lights were off. His housekeeper always left the entry chandelier on. Always. Dante's hand moved instinctively toward the Beretta holstered beneath his jacket as he stepped into the darkness, his Italian leather shoes silent on the marble floor. He reached for the light switch, his fingers an inch from the wall panel, when a voice cut through the blackness. "Don't move, Mr. Moretti." His body froze, not from fear, but from the calculated stillness of a predator assessing a threat. The voice belonged to Elena, the new maid his head of staff had hired 2 weeks ago through the agency. She was the mousy one with her hair always pulled back, the one who kept her eyes down and worked in silence. But she wasn't trembling now. She stood 10 feet away in the shadows, perfectly still, as a small flashlight in her left hand pointed at the floor near his feet. In her right hand, steady as stone, was a compact Glock aimed directly at his chest. "You're standing on a pressure plate," Elena said, her voice clinical, void of the nervous edge she'd always carried before. "The second you shift your weight, we both die." Dante's eyes adjusted to the darkness. He looked down without moving his head. There, barely visible beneath the Persian rug that had been in this exact spot for 3 years, the slightest elevation, a ridge that hadn't been there this morning. Someone had turned his bedroom entrance into a minefield, and the only thing standing between him and obliteration was the 26-year-old maid who shouldn't have known what a pressure plate looked like, much less how to recognize one in the dark. "Who are you?" Dante asked. On his voice a dangerous whisper. Elena's flashlight beam shifted, illuminating her face from below. Her features were sharper in the harsh light, her jaw set, her doe eyes replaced with something that looked like expertise. "Right now?" She lowered the gun, but kept it ready. "I'm the demolitions expert's daughter who just saved your life. But 5 minutes ago?" Her eyes locked with his. "I was the woman hired to poison your morning espresso." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a gunshot. Dante's mind raced through scenarios: betrayal, revenge, a rival family's play. But his body remained perfectly still, because beneath his feet, he could feel it now, the barely perceptible give of the trigger mechanism, balanced on a razor's edge between stability and catastrophe. "Why didn't you?" he asked. "Poison you?" Elena's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Because 3 nights ago, I overheard your capo and your nephew planning something worse than your death. They were planning to frame me for it, then kill me to tie up loose ends. And Mr. Moretti?" She stepped closer, the flashlight revealing the fresh carpet installation he'd been too distracted to notice. "The enemy of my enemy kept you breathing just long enough for me to tell you that the bomb under your feet has a timer backup. When it doesn't detonate, they'll know something went wrong." "How long?" Dante's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Elena glanced at her watch. 8 minutes before the cleanup crew arrives. Maybe 10 if we're lucky." For the first time in 20 years, Dante Moretti felt something he'd almost forgotten: genuine fear. And not for himself. Fear was a currency he'd spent long ago, but fear of dying before he could tear apart the people who'd betrayed him. "Can you disarm it?" he asked. Elena was already moving, dropping to her knees, the flashlight between her teeth as she pulled wire cutters from her apron pocket. My father was Alexei Volkov. He taught me to build things and how to destroy them. Let's hope I'm as good as he was. She crawled beneath the antique console table beside him, her hands moving with practiced precision. And that's when Dante Moretti realized. The most dangerous person in his empire wasn't the one who'd planted the bomb. It was the woman who'd spent 2 weeks cleaning his floors, learning his routines, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Except she'd changed her mind. And now his life was in her hands. And the next 45 minutes would change everything. But to understand how a mafia boss and an assassin became allies, you need to know how they became enemies, and how a girl named Elena Volkov spent 6 years planning a revenge that she would abandon in the span of a heartbeat. Elena's hands moved with surgical precision as she set down the Glock and retrieved her phone from her apron pocket. The screen's glow illuminated her face in sharp angles as she crouched beside Dante's frozen form. "Don't even think about moving," she said, her voice steady. "I need to see what we're dealing with." She aimed the phone's flashlight at the floor, tracing the outline of the pressure plate beneath the Persian rug. Her fingers pulled back the corner of the fabric, revealing fresh installation work, commercial-grade carpet tape, but still tacky to the touch. "I came in to clean at 7 this evening," Elena explained, her eyes never leaving the device. "The new carpet caught my attention immediately. You had the entire penthouse renovated 3 months ago. Italian marble, Brazilian hardwood, custom rugs. Why would anyone replace a 3-month-old carpet?" Dante's jaw tightened. She was right. He'd overseen every detail of that renovation personally. "My father was Alexei Volkov," Elena continued, crawling on her stomach now, the phone's light scanning beneath the console table. "Demolitions expert for the Bratva before he was killed. He taught me to read a room the way architects read blueprints. This," she gestured at the barely visible wiring, "this has a signature, military-grade pressure sensors, triple redundancy fail-safes. Whoever built this wanted to be absolutely certain." She disappeared under the bed frame, her voice muffled but clear. "Pass me that decorative vase on the table, carefully." Dante's hand moved with agonizing slowness, retrieving the Ming Dynasty vase worth $40,000 and lowering it toward her outstretched hand. She took it without ceremony, and there was a sharp crack as she shattered it against the floor. "What the hell? I need the copper wire from the base," Elena interrupted, emerging with ceramic shards and a coil of decorative wire. "And I need you to stop talking. This requires concentration." She vanished beneath the bed again, the phone flashlight casting nightmarish shadows across the ceiling. Dante could hear her breathing, controlled, measured, like a surgeon mid-operation. "This isn't amateur hour," Elena's voice drifted up, tight with focus. "C4 charges built directly into the wall studs, pressure sensors connected to a distributed network. Whoever did this wanted to take out this entire floor, maybe the 2 below it." Dante's mind raced through the possibilities. Victor Castellano, his capo for 15 years, ambitious, calculating, but this sophisticated? Marco, his nephew, entitled, resentful, but did he have the connections? Or someone else entirely? Someone he hadn't even considered a threat? The minutes stretched like hours. Sweat began to bead on Dante's forehead, despite the penthouse's climate control, despite his legendary composure that had stared down Sicilian dons and federal prosecutors without flinching. His calves screamed in protest, his lower back burned, but he didn't move, couldn't move. Thus Elena worked in silence, her hands steady beneath the bed frame. He could hear the soft click of wire cutters, the whisper of electrical tape being pulled, the occasional muttered curse in Russian. This was muscle memory. This was a woman who'd done this before. 20 minutes became 30. 30 became 45. "Elena," Dante said quietly, his voice strained. "How much longer?" Almost there. Her tone had shifted, less clinical now, edged with something that might have been doubt. There's a final junction point. 3 wires. Red, blue, black. Classic setup, but... But what? But your bomber isn't classic. They've inverted the standard configuration. If I cut the wrong one, we both become abstract art on the neighboring building. Dante's fingers flexed involuntarily near his side. For the first time in 20 years, his fate rested entirely in someone else's hands, someone who, by her own admission, had come here to kill him. The irony wasn't lost on him. Done. Elena emerged from beneath the bed, her face smudged with dust, her hair falling loose from its bun. She held up a small battery, the kind used in smoke detectors. I've rerouted the circuit through this. Dead cell. No charge. She stood, positioning herself directly in front of him, her dark eyes meeting his. On 3, you're going to shift your weight to your left foot, slowly. If I'm wrong about the reroute, we'll never know it. Ready? Dante had faced death 100 times, in back alleys, in boardrooms, in the crosshairs of rival families. But this was different. This required trust. He nodded. 1. Elena's voice was steady. 2. Dante's muscles coiled. 3. He shifted his weight. Silence. No explosion. No blinding light. Just the sound of his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Dante stepped away from the pressure plate completely, his legs nearly buckling from 45 minutes of immobility. The room remained intact. The city lights still glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He was alive. For the first time in 20 years, Dante Moretti realized he'd been genuinely afraid, not of death itself, but of dying before finishing what he'd started. His hand moved instinctively toward the Beretta beneath his jacket. "Who are you, really?" Dante demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Elena didn't flinch, didn't step back. She met his gaze with an intensity that matched his own. "Elena Volkov," she said quietly. "My father was Alexei Volkov." Dante's blood ran cold. And he remembered that name, remembered the night 6 years ago during the Brighton Beach consolidation, the warehouse, the fire, the bodies they'd never identified. "You had him killed," Elena finished, her voice void of emotion, 6 years ago during the Brighton Beach consolidation. The gun was halfway out of its holster when Dante froze again, not from a pressure plate this time, but from the look in her eyes. She'd just saved his life, and he'd killed her father. The Beretta cleared its holster, the weight familiar in Dante's hand, but he didn't raise it, not yet. "Alexei Volkov," Dante said, his voice flat, factual. "Collateral damage. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong employer. He was wiring a safe house for Constantine's crew during the consolidation. I gave the order to eliminate everyone in that building." "He was my father." Elena's voice cracked for the first time since she'd whispered, "Don't move." "The only family I had left." The gun rose slightly, Dante's finger resting alongside the trigger guard. Not on it, but close. "So you're here for revenge. Clever. Get hired through an agency, blend in for a few weeks, poison my coffee, disappear into whatever life you'd built for yourself. Clean. Professional." "Yes." Elena didn't retreat, didn't reach for the Glock she'd set on the console table. She simply stood there, dust-smudged and exhausted, meeting his gaze without wavering. "That was the plan." "Was? I was supposed to poison your coffee last Tuesday," Elena said. "Ricin derivative, slow acting. You'd have been dead within 72 hours, organ failure. They'd have blamed it on stress, age, lifestyle. No autopsy for men like you. Too many people who don't want questions asked." Dante's jaw clenched. "What stopped you?" Elena pulled her phone from her apron pocket again, swiped through the screen, and held it out to him. 3 nights ago, you were in Miami. I was cleaning your study. I heard voices in the hallway and hid behind the curtains. She pressed play. The video was shaky, filmed from a low angle through heavy fabric, but the audio was crystal clear. Victor Castellanos' gravelly voice filled the silence. The same voice that had toasted Dante's birthday last month, that had stood beside him during the Romano negotiations, that had sworn loyalty on his mother's grave. The pressure plate is calibrated for 180 pounds or more. The second he steps on it, boom, takes out the bedroom. The floor below, maybe 2 floors. Structural collapse makes it look like a gas leak or faulty construction. Marco's voice followed. Younger, eager, dripping with ambition Dante had once mistaken for potential. And the girl? The maid? Perfect scapegoat. Alexei Volkov's daughter. We make sure the investigators find her background, plant some evidence of bomb-making materials in her apartment. Scorned daughter gets revenge on the man who killed her father. She dies in the blast, too. Tragic. Poetic. The Bratva loves that kind of symmetry. Marco laughed. Killed 2 birds with 1 bomb. Exactly. Then we move fast. I take the southern territories, you take the north. The Bratva gets the ports and distribution in exchange for backing our claim. By the time anyone realizes what happened, we're already consolidated. Dante's hand tightened on the Beretta, his knuckles white. Elena swiped to another video. This one showed Victor and Marco with 3 men Dante didn't recognize. Bratva, based on their tattoos visible when one rolled up his sleeves. Moretti's getting soft, Victor said, accepting a glass of vodka. All this talk about legitimate business, diversification, reducing our footprint. He's forgotten what built this empire, fear, blood. We're going back to basics. The phone screen went dark. Dante stood motionless, processing. Victor Castellano, the man he'd pulled out of a gutter in Red Hook 15 years ago, who'd been sleeping in abandoned cars and eating from dumpsters. Dante had given him a job, a purpose, a family, had trusted him with everything. Marco, his sister's son, the boy he'd sent to private school, and to college, who'd sat at every holiday table. His chosen successor. The Bratva, Dante said quietly, each word precise as a blade. They're backing this. Same organization that employed my father, Elena confirmed. They want your ports, your distribution networks, your political connections. Victor and Marco are selling you out for territory and protection. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. Dante had survived 2 decades in this life by never fully trusting anyone, but he'd let these 2 past his defenses. Had believed that loyalty once earned was permanent. He'd been a fool. Why save me? Dante asked, finally lowering the gun. You had your revenge handed to you on a silver platter. All you had to do was nothing. Let them kill me. Disappear. Live your life. Elena's expression shifted. Something raw and honest breaking through her controlled facade. Because they were going to kill me too. And because... She paused, choosing her words carefully. My father taught me that honor matters even in this world. He wouldn't want me to let an innocent man, relatively speaking, die in a trap meant to frame me for his murder. Relatively speaking, Dante repeated, almost smiling. You killed him, Elena said simply, but you didn't torture him. You didn't make him suffer. You gave the order and it was done. That's not mercy, but it's not cruelty either. It's business. Victor and Marco? She gestured at the phone. They laugh about killing people. They enjoy it. That's different. Before Dante could respond, Elena's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and her face went pale. What? That bomb had a timer backup, she said, her voice urgent. When it didn't detonate at the designated time, it sent an alert to whoever's monitoring it. How long do we have? It failed to detonate 4 minutes ago. Response time for a cleanup crew? Elena's eyes met his. 8, maybe 10 minutes before they arrive. Less if they were already positioned nearby. Dante's tactical mind shifted into gear, running scenarios, calculating exits, assessing resources. He couldn't go to his captains, didn't know who else Victor had turned. Couldn't call his usual security. They reported to Victor. His safe houses, his vehicles, his weapons caches, all potentially compromised. He had one gun, no phone, and a maid who'd come to kill him. "The service elevator," Dante said, already moving toward the kitchen. "It's the only exit they won't have covered yet. They'll assume I'm dead or trapped up here waiting for the secondary detonation." Elena grabbed her Glock from the console table, checked the magazine with practiced efficiency, and followed. Dante paused at the kitchen entrance, looking back at her. For the first time, he truly saw her, not as the invisible maid, but as Alexei Volkov's daughter, a woman who'd spent 6 years planning revenge and abandoned it in a heartbeat when something worse appeared. "You saved my life," Dante said. "That makes you complicit in my survival. The moment they realize I'm alive and you helped me, they'll come for you next." "So we run together?" "We survive together," Dante corrected. "Then we make them regret ever whispering my name." Elena nodded once, sharp and certain. "Service elevator. Let's move." Together, they slipped through the kitchen toward the back corridors of the penthouse, the most feared Mafia boss in New York, and the woman who'd been seconds away from poisoning him, now allies against the men who'd betrayed them both. Behind them, Dante's former life waited in darkness. Ahead, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the building's stairwell. They had maybe 2 minutes. "This way!" Elena didn't wait for Dante to follow. She simply moved, her body language shifting from hesitant maid to someone who'd spent weeks mapping every inch of this penthouse. She led him through the master bedroom, past the 4-poster bed where he'd slept for 3 years, and into the walk-in closet. Her hands moved with certainty, pushing aside his hand-tailored suits to reveal a service panel in the back wall. "You planned this route," Dante observed, his voice low. Elena twisted the panel's release mechanism, something even Dante hadn't known existed in his own closet. "I planned a lot of things, Mr. Moretti. Most of them involved your death." The panel swung open, revealing a narrow service corridor thick with dust and the smell of old concrete. They slipped inside, Elena pulling it shut behind them. In the darkness, Dante heard her breathing, controlled, focused, a woman who'd rehearsed this escape 100 times in her mind. "There's a laundry chute 20 feet ahead," she whispered. "It drops to the basement level. It's going to be tight." "How tight?" "Tight enough that you'll want to exhale first." The chute was barely wide enough for Dante's shoulders. He went first, Elena's flashlight app illuminating the metal shaft from above. And the drop was stomach-lurching, 3 floors in near freefall before he hit the industrial laundry bin with a crash that knocked the wind from his lungs. Elena landed seconds later with far more grace, rolling out of the bin like she'd done this before. They emerged into the parking garage just as the elevator doors at the main entrance dinged open. 3 black SUVs screeched to a halt outside the building's front entrance, visible through the garage's glass security doors. "Down!" Dante grabbed Elena's arm, pulling her behind a concrete support pillar. Through the gaps between parked cars, they watched heavily armed men pour out of the SUVs, at least a dozen, moving with military precision. Victor Castellano stepped out of the lead vehicle, his phone pressed to his ear, barking orders. "They're early," Elena breathed. "They're thorough," Dante corrected. "Victor trained under me. He knows how I think." "Then we need to stop thinking like you." Elena grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the far corner of the garage, where a sad-looking Toyota Camry sat in the visitor parking. Rust bloomed along the wheel wells. The rear bumper hung at an angle. One headlight was held on with duct tape. Dante stared at it, then at her. "This is your car?" "It gets me from point A to point B." Elena unlocked it manually. No key fob, just an actual key in an actual lock. "Get in." The irony wasn't lost on Dante as he folded himself into the passenger seat. 12 floors above them sat his personal garage. A Maserati, 2 Mercedes, a vintage Alfa Romeo, and here he was, fleeing for his life in a vehicle worth maybe $1,500. Elena jammed the key in the ignition, wiggled it violently, and the engine coughed to life. "I drive. You don't know the back routes. I know every street in this city. You know the main streets. I know the ones that don't show up on GPS." She threw the Camry into reverse just as the first explosion rocked the building. The penthouse, Dante's penthouse, erupted in a ball of flame visible even from the basement level. The concussion rattled windows. Car alarms screamed. The entire structure groaned, and for a horrifying moment, Dante thought the building might collapse. "Victor triggered it remotely," Elena said, her voice tight as she navigated toward the service ramp. "He thinks you're still up there." "How do you know?" "Because if he thought you escaped, he wouldn't destroy the evidence. He'd want your body." They burst out of the service exit just as the second wave of explosions hit. Elena floored it, the Camry's 4-cylinder engine whining in protest as they shot into the street. Behind them, debris rained down, and Dante caught a glimpse of his home, his fortress collapsing in on itself. "Headlights," Dante said sharply. "2 vehicles. They spotted us." Elena's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. 2 of the SUVs had peeled away from the building, their high beams cutting through the smoke and chaos. What followed was the most terrifying 10 minutes of Dante's life, and he'd survived 3 assassination attempts, 2 federal investigations, and a sit-down with the Sicilian Commission. Elena drove like the devil himself was chasing them. She whipped the Camry through narrow streets, to cut across a sidewalk to avoid a traffic light, threaded between delivery trucks with inches to spare. She knew every one-way street, every alley, every shortcut through neighborhoods Dante had only driven through with armed escorts. "Where did you learn to drive like this?" Dante demanded, gripping the door handle as she drifted around a corner on what felt like 2 wheels. "My father." Elena's voice was steady despite the speedometer pushing 80 in a 30-mile zone. "He said if you're going to work in this life, you need to know how to leave it quickly." The SUVs stayed with them, their superior horsepower closing the gap on straightaways. But in the tight turns, the heavy vehicles couldn't match the Camry's maneuverability. "I can't go to my safe houses," Dante said, thinking aloud. "Victor knows them all, and I can't contact my captains, don't know who else he's turned. My usual resources are compromised." "Then you need unusual resources." Elena yanked the wheel hard left, shooting down a service alley barely wider than the car. "You have one, actually." "What's that?" "Me." She emerged from the alley onto a main street, immediately blending into traffic, the battered Camry invisible among the other working-class vehicles. "I have a place," Elena continued, checking the mirrors. "Off the grid. My father's old workshop in Red Hook. It's been abandoned for 3 years since the Bratva cleared out of that sector." "You're taking me to a Russian mob safe house?" Dante almost laughed. "Former Russian mob safe house. No one knows about it except me. I've been paying the utilities through a shell company to keeping it maintained." Dante watched her profile, the determined set of her jaw, the way her hands gripped the wheel with professional competence. He was making a calculation he'd made 1,000 times in his career. Trust or don't trust. The stakes had never been higher. The woman beside him had spent 6 years planning his death. She'd saved his life. She'd abandoned her revenge to expose a greater betrayal. She was either the most trustworthy ally he'd ever had or the most elaborate trap ever set. "Red Hook," he said finally. "Let's go." They lost the pursuit in the industrial district, Elena's knowledge of the area proving insurmountable. The SUV's headlights faded, swallowed by the maze of warehouses and shipping containers. Elena pulled into a derelict building, corrugated steel walls, broken windows, the kind of place where bodies ended up and questions didn't. She killed the engine, and sudden silence enveloped them. "Welcome to rock bottom, Mr. Moretti," she said quietly. Dante looked around at the graffiti-covered walls, the trash-strewn corners, the general decay. Then he smiled, the first genuine smile in hours. "I've been in worse places," he said. "When?" "Brooklyn, 1993. I was building my empire from a basement just like this one. Concrete floor, rats the size of cats, winter cold enough to see your breath indoors." Elena turned to look at him, really look at him. "Then you know what it takes to rebuild from nothing." "Yes," Dante said, meeting her eyes. "I do." The interior of Alexei Volkov's workshop smelled like metal and memory. See, Elena led Dante through the main floor, a cavernous space lined with work tables covered in dust sheets, tools still hanging on pegboards like artifacts in a museum. Soldering irons, wire strippers, voltage meters, calipers. Everything meticulously organized, waiting for hands that would never return. "There's an apartment upstairs," Elena said, her voice softer now, stripped of the urgency that had propelled them through the escape. "It's not much, but it's functional." The apartment was Spartan, a Murphy bed pulled down from the wall, a kitchenette with a hot plate and an ancient percolator, a single window overlooking the industrial wasteland of Red Hook. But it was clean. The utilities worked. Someone had been maintaining this place. "I've been paying the bills under a shell company," Elena admitted, moving toward the kitchenette. I told myself it was to honor his memory. Keep his space alive." Dante shrugged off his blood-stained jacket, draping it over a metal chair. Beneath the Brioni suit, his shirt was soaked through with sweat. He looked exhausted, not just physically, but existentially. The legend stripped down to the man beneath. "But really," Dante said, watching her fill the percolator with water, "you were preparing a bolt hole. Somewhere to run after you killed me." Elena paused, her back to him. "Yes." "Smart." She turned, surprised by the absence of judgment in his voice. "Coffee? Please." The percolator bubbled and hissed on the hot plate, filling the small space with the smell of cheap Colombian blend. Elena retrieved 2 mismatched mugs from a cabinet, poured carefully, and handed one to Dante. And they sat across from each other at a small folding table, the first real stillness since the moment she'd said, "Don't move." Not boss and assassin, not hunter and prey. Just 2 people holding hot mugs in a dead man's apartment. "Tell me about Alexei," Dante said quietly. Elena's fingers wrapped around the mug, seeking warmth. "He was a craftsman, a real one. He could build anything. Circuit boards, pressure systems, timing mechanisms. He wanted to be an engineer, design bridges or buildings. But he grew up in Rostov during the collapse. There were no jobs, no opportunities, just the bratva." She took a sip, her eyes distant. "He came to Brooklyn when I was 8. Worked for Konstantin Volkov's crew. No relation, just coincidence. He did technical work, built safes, security systems, sometimes less legal things. But he wasn't a soldier. He didn't kill people. He just built things." "And he wanted better for you," Dante said. It wasn't a question. "He worked for the bratva to pay for my education. Private school in Queens, college applications, SAT prep. He wanted me to be the engineer he never got to be." Her voice cracked slightly. "Instead, I became this." Dante remembered the operation 6 years ago. The Brighton Beach consolidation had been brutal, but necessary. Konstantin Volkov's crew controlled 3 blocks of waterfront, perfect for shipping. They'd refused to negotiate, so Dante had removed them. Permanently. "I ordered the hit on Konstantin's crew," Dante said, meeting her eyes. "Your father was listed as an associate, a technical expert who could build counter-surveillance, who knew the safe house layouts." "He was a contractor," Elena said, her voice sharp. "He built things. He didn't kill people. He was there installing a new security panel when your men came through the doors." Dante felt something unfamiliar. Not quite guilt, but something in that neighborhood. In this world, proximity is guilt. "I couldn't risk leaving loose ends." Someone with his skills, working for my enemies, knowing their operations. He paused. I made a calculation. Your father was part of that equation. Like Victor is doing now, Elena pointed out, her tone cutting. Making calculations, eliminating loose ends, including you. The parallel hung between them, sharp as a blade. Dante pulled out Elena's phone, which she'd handed him in the car. Show me the videos again, all of them. They spent the next hour reviewing the evidence. 3 recordings total. Video 1, Victor and Marco in Dante's study, discussing the bomb placement with technical precision. The pressure plate, the C4 charges, the timer backup. Marco laughing about the poetic justice of framing Alexei Volkov's daughter. Video 2, Victor meeting with 3 Bratva representatives in a restaurant Dante recognized, one of their fronts in Brighton Beach. Territory maps spread across the table. Percentages discussed. Victor trading away Dante's empire piece by piece. Video 3, the frame job logistics. How they'd plant evidence in Elena's apartment. How they'd leak her background to the media. How the narrative would write itself. Scorned daughter, dead father, bomb expertise in the family. Victor's been planning this for months, Dante said, his voice cold with analysis. Maybe longer. He began connecting dots that had seemed random before. Shipment delays that Victor blamed on dock strikes. Restructured accounts that Victor said were for tax optimization. Captains reassigned to new territories. Their replacements, all Victor's people. He's been isolating me, Dante realized. Moving my loyal people out, bringing his people in, setting up his own infrastructure inside mine. How many can you trust? Elena asked. Dante looked around the Spartan apartment, thought about his empire reduced to rubble, his home destroyed, his right hand turned traitor. Right now, in this room, 1, you. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. A woman who'd spent 6 years planning his death was now his only ally. We need to expose them, Dante said, his strategic mind engaging. Public. Undeniable. Video evidence isn't enough. They'll call it deepfake, manipulation. Yet we need them caught in the act. How? Elena leaned forward. You're dead. The building came down. By morning, you'll be all over the news. Mafia boss perishes in penthouse explosion. Your funeral will be front page. Dante's eyes lit up with something dangerous. Exactly. I'm a ghost, and ghosts can go places the living can't. You want to use your death. I want to attend my own funeral, Dante said, and see who celebrates. They began planning, their expertise complementing each other with surprising efficiency. Elena knew surveillance, infiltration, how to move invisibly. Dante knew the psychology of his organization, the weak points in Victor's network, who could be turned and who couldn't. Together, they mapped Victor's new empire on the back of old blueprint paper Elena found in a drawer. As dawn light began filtering through the grimy window, Elena stood and walked to a locked cabinet in the corner. She opened it, revealing her father's old toolkit. Precision instruments laid out with military organization. Wire cutters, detonators, circuit testers, each one a memory. She ran her fingers over them, her touch reverent. He taught me everything, how to build, how to destroy. Dante watched her from the table, this woman who contained multitudes. Can you build again? Build something that doesn't end in blood? Elena looked at him, the question reflecting back. Can you? You've spent 20 years destroying your enemies, consolidating power, eliminating threats. Can you create something instead? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and doubt. What comes after revenge? What comes after empire? What comes after you've died and been reborn in a workshop full of ghosts? Neither of them had an answer. Not yet. The old television in Alexei's workshop flickered with grainy morning news. Elena had found it in a closet, its rabbit ear antennae held together with electrical tape, a relic from her father's era. Breaking news. Explosion rocks luxury penthouse in Manhattan's financial district. Dante Moretti, alleged organized crime figure, presumed dead. The news anchor's voice was somber, respectful even. Helicopter footage showed the building's top 3 floors collapsed into themselves, smoke still rising into the gray morning sky. Fire crews worked the scene. Police barriers held back crowds of onlookers. Then the camera cut to a press conference. Victor Castellano stood at a podium, dressed in an immaculate black suit, and his face a masterpiece of controlled grief. "This is a tragic loss," Victor said, his voice catching at precisely the right moment. "Dante was like a father to me. He gave me everything. Whoever did this, and we will find them. They didn't just take a man. They took a pillar of our community." Marco stepped up beside him, younger, his jaw tight, with what looked like barely contained rage. "We will find who did this, and justice will be served." The performance was flawless. Dante stood in front of the television, coffee mug in hand, his face unreadable. But Elena had learned to read the subtle signs, the tightness around his eyes, the way his knuckles whitened on the mug's handle. "Victor always was a good liar," Dante said quietly. "I taught him that." "He learned from the best," Elena replied. Dante turned off the television. I need intelligence. Who's stayed loyal, who's turned, who's waiting to see which way the wind blows. But I can't use my usual channels. They all run through Victor now." Elena set down her own coffee, an idea forming. "Use mine." "The Bratva won't help me." "Not the Bratva," Elena said. "The people who worked with my father, contractors, independents, the skilled people who owe the Volkov name." Dante studied her. "You think they'll help the man who killed Alexei?" "I think they'll help me." Elena pulled out her phone, a burner she'd retrieved from a hiding spot in the workshop. "And I think they hate what the Bratva has become even more than they hate you." Over the next hour, Elena made 3 calls. Each conversation was brief, coded, careful. First, Yuri Petrov, electronics expert. "I'm the man who'd taught her father advanced circuit design." "Little Lena? I thought you'd gone straight." A long pause. "For Alexei's daughter, I listen." Second, Katya Morozova, forger, a woman whose sister Alexei had helped escape an abusive Bratva captain. The life debt was never repaid. Where and when? Third, Dmitry Sokolov, muscle with a surprisingly gentle soul, who'd loved Alexei like the brother he'd lost in Chechnya. "You need me, you got me, no questions." The meeting place was an abandoned subway station in Red Hook, one of the ghost stops closed during budget cuts in the 80s. Elena knew it from her father's stories. He'd used it for dead drops. Dante and Elena descended the rusted stairwell as evening fell. The platform smelled of standing water and old concrete. Fluorescent lights still worked, powered by some forgotten grid connection, casting everything in sickly green. 3 figures waited on the platform. Dante stayed in the shadows of the stairwell while Elena approached. His hand rested on the Beretta tucked into his waistband. Trust only went so far. Little Lena, the oldest of the 3, a man in his 60s with silver hair and reading glasses perched on his nose, stepped forward. "You look like your mother." "Hello, Yuri." Elena embraced him quickly. "Thank you for coming." The woman, Katya, rail-thin with sharp eyes and a cigarette burning between her fingers, nodded. The big man, Dmitry, his face scarred from old fights, crossed his arms but didn't speak. "You said you needed help," Yuri said. "For your father's memory." Elena pulled out her phone, queued up the first video. "I need you to watch something." They gathered around the screen. As Victor and Marco's voices filled the abandoned station, discussing bombs and frame jobs and territory splits, Elena watched their faces change. Dimitri's hands clenched into fists. They work with the Bratva? The same bastards who used Alexei? The same ones who turned him into collateral damage, Elena confirmed. And now they're using his death, using me as a tool, a scapegoat. We burn them, Dmitri growled. We burn them all. Not just them, Elena said quietly. I need you to understand the full picture. She took a breath, then turned toward the shadows. Dante Moretti is alive. He's here, and he wants justice. Dante stepped into the light. The reaction was immediate. Katya's hand went to her jacket. Dmitri's fists rose. Yuri simply froze, his face pale. Easy, Elena said, positioning herself between Dante and her father's friends. He's with me. He killed Alexei, Dmitri spat. Yes, Dante said, his voice carrying across the platform. I did. I gave the order. I knew the casualties would include non-combatants, and I accepted that cost. He paused, meeting each of their eyes in turn. I know what you think of me. I know what I took from you. But Victor Castellano and the Bratva took more. They used Alexei's death as a bargaining chip. They dishonored his memory by making it a footnote in their betrayal. Why should we help you? Yuri asked, his voice cold. Because Elena asked, Dante said simply, and because I'm offering you what I never gave before, a choice. He stepped closer, hands visible, non-threatening. Help me expose Victor and the Bratva. In return, I leave Brighton Beach, completely. Your people run it. No interference, no tribute, no oversight. It becomes neutral territory. Katya's eyes narrowed. You'd give up territory, just like that? I'd give up territory to cut out a cancer, Dante corrected. Victor's not just betraying me. He's bringing federal heat, starting wars, operating without code or honor. He'll burn this entire city down for profit. That's bad for everyone's business. Dmitri looked at Elena. This is what you want, Lena? Working with him? It's what my father would want, Elena said. Not the revenge, the justice. There's a difference. The three exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Dmitri spoke. We do this for Alexei, for Lena, not for you. Dante nodded. Fair enough. Over the next 48 hours, the Ghost Network assembled. Yuri provided surveillance equipment, bugs so sophisticated they could pick up conversations through triple-pane glass. I can wire Victor's new headquarters, get you real-time intelligence on his movements. Katya offered documentation services. I can create paper trails, make it look like other families are moving on Victor's territory, seed paranoia in his ranks. Dmitri brought muscle, not Bratva, but independents who'd been squeezed out by the organization's expansion. People who hate the Bratva more than they hate you, Moretti. That's saying something. The power dynamic shifted in ways Dante found simultaneously uncomfortable and fascinating. These weren't his soldiers. They didn't report to him. They worked for Elena, followed her lead, took her orders. He was a consultant to her operation. And it bothered him less than he'd expected. Late on the second night, Elena and Dante reviewed the intelligence Yuri had gathered. Victor had moved quickly, consolidating power, calling meetings with the other families, positioning himself as the natural successor. You're good at this, Dante observed. Building loyalty. Your father would be proud. Elena didn't look up from the surveillance photos. My father would be horrified I'm working with you. But you are. Why? She finally met his eyes. Because Victor and Marco represent everything my father hated. The new generation with no code, no honor. Just greed dressed up in expensive suits. And I'm different? You're the devil, I understand, Elena said. You killed my father for strategic reasons, not because it entertained you. You have rules, even if I don't agree with them. Victor and Marco? She gestured at the photos. They're chaos, and chaos kills everyone. Dante smiled slightly. The devil, you understand. I'll take it. Yuri's surveillance equipment delivered intelligence like clockwork. 3 days after the Ghost Network assembled, he arrived at the workshop with recordings that made Elena's blood run cold. "Victor's hosting a summit," Yuri said, playing back the audio. "1 week from today, he's dividing the empire." The location made Elena laugh bitterly. Volkov's, an exclusive Russian restaurant in Brighton Beach. The irony was sharp as a blade, Victor celebrating on territory built with her father's blood. "It's perfect," Dante said, listening to the guest list Yuri had intercepted. Bratva leadership, Victor's captains, Marco, even representatives from the other families. "He's making it official. Public. Undeniable." "Then we crash it," Elena said. "With what army?" Yuri gestured at their limited resources. "Victor will have 20 armed men minimum. The Bratva will bring their own security. We'd need to be ghosts," Dante interrupted, his tactical mind engaging. "We don't fight our way in. We're invited." Elena stood, walking to a filing cabinet in the corner. She pulled out a folder thick with yellowed blueprints. "The restaurant, Volkov's. It was one of my father's projects." Dante looked up. "Meaning?" "Meaning there are ways in that only a demolitions expert would know." She spread the plans across the work table. "Prohibition-era service tunnels. Maintenance access hidden behind false walls. Ventilation routes large enough to crawl through. My father documented everything." Over the next 6 days, they prepared. Elena studied the blueprints until she could navigate the building blindfolded. Dante coordinated with Dmitri, positioning backup muscle at strategic points around the restaurant's perimeter. Yuri worked on the audio-visual evidence, cleaning up the recordings, preparing them for broadcast. Katya created the documentation, fake invitations, false credentials, a paper trail that would pass even paranoid scrutiny. The night of the summit, Elena stood in front of a mirror in the workshop's bathroom, barely recognizing herself. Gone was the maid's uniform, the pulled-back hair, the invisible posture. Katya had procured an elegant black evening gown that hugged Elena's frame like armor. Her hair fell in dark waves around her shoulders. Minimal makeup, but expertly applied. Diamond earrings, fake but convincing. She looked like old money. "I'd like power. Like someone named Yelena Volkova, representative of Volkov interests." Dante emerged from the other room in a server's uniform, white jacket, black bow tie, the universal camouflage of the service industry. In his hand, he carried a garment bag. "For later," he said, catching her expression. "After the reveal." They arrived separately. Elena through the front entrance in a town car Dmitri had borrowed. Dante through the service entrance with the catering staff Yuri had infiltrated. The maitre d' checked Elena's invitation. Katya's forgery was flawless. "Ms. Volkova, welcome. Your security detail?" 2 of Dmitri's men stepped forward, dressed in expensive suits, their bulk suggesting exactly what they were. "Of course. Right this way." Volkov's was opulent in the way of old Russian establishments. Crystal chandeliers, a red velvet, private rooms with heavy doors. Security was visible but discreet. Men in dark suits at every exit, metal detectors disguised as decorative archways. Elena was escorted to the main dining hall, a palatial space where 50 people mingled over champagne and caviar. At the head table sat the architects of the New World Order. Victor Castellano held court like a king, expansive gestures, confident smile. He'd gained weight in the week since Dante's death. The weight of stolen power suited him. Marco sat at his right hand, younger, hungrier, already looking past Victor toward his own ambitions. At the head of the table, Alexander Morozov, the Bratva's current Pakan. 70 years old, white-haired, with eyes that had seen the Soviet collapse and survived. Victor noticed Elena immediately. His smile widened as he approached. "Ms. Volkova, your father was a valued associate. His death was tragic." Elena accepted his extended hand, her grip firm, as was Mr. Moretti's, though some tragedies are more convenient than others. Victor's smile tightened fractionally. Meaning? Meaning my organization wants assurances. Elena's voice carried the aristocratic Russian accent Katya had coached her on. The Volkov family has questions about how this transition occurred. Alexander Morozov's attention shifted to her. The Volkovs have concerns? The Volkovs want to know if Dante Moretti's death was as accidental as claimed, Elena said, meeting the Pakan's eyes without flinching. Victor interrupted, his voice sharp. This is neither the time nor place. Then when? Elena challenged. Before or after you finish dividing his empire? Before or after you've erased every trace of what happened? The room had gone quiet, conversations dying like candles in wind. Before Victor could respond, the lights cut out. Emergency generators kicked in after 3 seconds of absolute darkness, bathing everything in dim red emergency lighting. A projector screen descended from the ceiling, equipment that shouldn't have been there, pre-positioned by Dmitri's crew during a maintenance call 2 days prior. Yuri's voice crackled over the restaurant's sound system. Good evening, gentlemen. Please direct your attention to the screen. The first video began, Victor and Marco in Dante's study, discussing the bomb with casual precision. Their voices filled the silent room. The pressure plate is calibrated for 180 pounds or more. Victor lunged toward the projection equipment. But Dmitri's men, positioned throughout the room as waiters, guests, security, revealed themselves, weapons drawn. The kitchen doors swung open. Dante Moretti stepped out. He was no longer in the server's uniform. He wore one of his signature suits, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, the uniform of power. His hair was combed back. His face was clean-shaven. He looked every inch the king returning from the dead. The room went absolutely silent. I heard you were celebrating, Dante said, his voice carrying across the space with terrible calm. I came to see who had the balls to drink from my glass. Victor reached for his weapon. 6 red laser dots appeared on his chest. Marco tried to run. Elena stepped into his path, a compact Beretta appearing in her hand with practiced ease. Sit down, Marco. Alexander Morozov leaned back in his chair, on his weathered face unreadable. This is interesting. Dante walked to the head table, his footsteps the only sound. You were told I died in an accident, Alexander. The videos show otherwise. And if they're fabricated? Alexander asked calmly. Then ask Victor why he looks like he's seen a ghost. Dante gestured to his former capo, whose face had gone white as snow. Ask him why he told you my death would look natural. A plane crash, wasn't it? When instead he built a bomb that took out 40 people in my building, civilians, collateral damage that brings federal heat. Alexander pulled out his phone. Yuri had sent him the videos directly. He watched in silence, his expression darkening with each second. Victor. The Pakan's voice was soft, dangerous. You told me this was clean, a plane crash, no mess, no heat. Victor stammered. Oh, it was supposed to be. The bomb was back up. You brought the FBI to our doorstep with your sloppiness, Alexander interrupted. You lied about the method. You lied about the girl. He gestured to Elena. You were going to start a war and blame us. We had a deal. Victor's composure shattered. You said... I said I'd support a competent replacement. Alexander made a small gesture. His men grabbed Victor and Marco. You are not competent. You are reckless. Victor screamed, thrashing against the hands that held him. Marco begged, his arrogance dissolved into terror. Dante watched but didn't intervene. This was Bratva justice, not his. Alexander stood, facing Dante across the table. We did not sanction the bombing. This was Victor's freelancing. I know, Dante said. Oh, which is why I'm here talking instead of shooting. What do you want, Moretti? Peace, real peace, clear boundaries. No more ambitious underbosses starting wars. Alexander considered. And Brighton Beach? Dante turned, gesturing to Elena. Is no longer mine. I'm ceding it to the Volkov interests. Elena's head snapped toward him. This wasn't part of the plan. The Volkov family has always been honorable, Alexander said slowly. A smile crept across his face. This arrangement is acceptable. He nodded to his men. Take them. Do what you will. But Victor and Marco are ours first. They dragged the traitors out, their pleas fading into the night. The other families filed out quickly, wanting no part of what came next. Dante and Elena stood alone in the restaurant, surrounded by overturned champagne glasses and abandoned plates. The summit was over, the old order restored. But everything had changed. Victor and Marco's fate was sealed before they left Volkov's restaurant. The Bratva didn't believe in trials or second chances. By dawn, their bodies would be unrecognizable, their names erased from the organization they'd tried to steal. Dante didn't ask for details. Some things were better left to imagination. Word spread through the underworld with the speed of wildfire. Dante Moretti was alive. The coup had failed. The ghost had returned. His captains who'd stayed neutral during the power vacuum began returning like prodigal children, pledging loyalty, swearing they'd never doubted. Dante accepted their oaths with the same expression he'd worn during their absence, unreadable, calculating, remembering. Those who'd sided with Victor disappeared. Some left voluntarily, smart enough to know their window of opportunity had closed. Others required more permanent solutions. The purge was surgical, efficient, and necessary. Dante couldn't return to his bombed penthouse. The building was condemned under federal investigation, crawling with questions he couldn't answer. Instead, he acquired a new space in Tribeca, smaller but more secure. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson, security systems Yuri had personally installed, escape routes Elena had approved. His organization was smaller now, but tighter, more loyal. The opportunists were gone, leaving only those who understood that loyalty meant something beyond profit margins. Elena spent her days coordinating with the Bratva on Brighton Beach's transition. Alexander had been true to his word. The territory was hers. No interference, no tribute. She established new rules, new protocols, cleaning house with ruthless efficiency. The Volkov name, dormant for 6 years, was resurrected, and this time, it meant something different. Something earned, not inherited. 2 weeks after the summit, Dante summoned Elena to his new office. She found him standing at the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the city he'd nearly lost. I owe you my life, Dante said without turning. Name your price. Elena studied him, the silhouette of power, the man who'd survived because she'd chosen mercy over revenge. I already have Brighton Beach. What more could I want? Dante turned. A position, not as a territory boss, as my consigliere. The words hung in the air like smoke. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Your advisor? I came to kill you 3 weeks ago. I know. Dante moved to his desk, leaning against it, arms crossed. That's exactly why I'm asking. That makes no sense. It makes perfect sense, Dante countered. Every person in my organization wants something from me. Power, money, status, advancement. They tell me what I want to hear because disagreeing has consequences. He pushed off the desk, closing the distance between them. You wanted revenge. You gave it up. That makes you the only person I can trust not to be blinded by ambition. Or I'm playing a longer game, Elena suggested. You saved my life when you had every reason to let me die, Dante continued. That makes you honorable, even if you don't think so. You negotiated with the Bratva, built a network from nothing, executed a plan that exposed a coup. And that makes you capable. He held her gaze. I need someone who doesn't need me. Someone who chose to help me, not because of what I could give them, but because it was right. Do you understand how rare that is in my world? Elena walked to the window, her reflection ghost-like against the city lights. Accepting meant fully entering the world that had killed her father, becoming part of the machine that had destroyed her family. "My father wanted me to go to college, become an engineer, live a clean life," she said quietly. "Your father taught you explosives, defensive driving, and how to read floor plans," Dante replied. "He knew what world he lived in. He just hoped you could avoid it. He wanted better for me." "Better is relative," Dante said, joining her at the window. "You can run Brighton Beach as a tyrant or a reformer. You can advise me toward more violence or toward strategy. You have power now, Elena. The question is, how will you use it?" Elena stared at her reflection, not the maid, not the assassin, but something in between, something new. "I have conditions," she said finally. "Name them." 1. No more collateral damage. If we move on someone, we know everyone in the blast radius. No more Alexei Volkovs dying because they were in the wrong place. Dante considered, then nodded. "Agreed." 2. Brighton Beach becomes a clean zone. No drugs, no trafficking. Legitimate business only. "That's money off the table," Dante said carefully. "It's blood off your hands. Take it or leave it." A long pause. Then, "Agreed." Elena turned to face him. 3. You tell me the truth. Always. About operations, about risks. It's about your decisions. "Why does that matter?" "Because I can't advise you if you lie to me. And because—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Because my father died not knowing who ordered the hit. I won't work in the dark. I won't be a tool who doesn't understand the hand that wields her." Dante met her eyes, and she saw something unexpected there. Respect. "Omerta to the world," he said. "Truth to you." Agreed. That evening, Dante hosted a dinner in his new penthouse. The remaining captains arrived in expensive suits, uncertain and wary. Victor's absence was a wound still fresh, a reminder that loyalty had consequences, and so did betrayal. They gathered in the dining room, crystal glasses and imported wine, the trappings of civilization masking the violence beneath. Dante stood at the head of the table. "Gentlemen, we've survived a coup. We've exposed traitors. We've rebuilt. But we need something we haven't had in a long time. Continuity. Wisdom. Someone who sees beyond the next territory grab." He gestured to Elena, who stood in the doorway. She wore a tailored black suit, her hair pulled back, her expression unreadable. "This is Elena Volkov. She saved my life. She exposed Victor's betrayal. She's now my consigliere." The reaction was immediate, shock rippling through the room like a stone thrown in still water. Antonio, the oldest captain, spoke first. "With respect, boss, she's not family. She's not even Italian." Dante's smile was sharp as a blade. "Neither was Victor. Look how that turned out." Elena stepped forward, reading the room. The skepticism, the resentment, the calculation in every face. "I know what you think," she said. Yes, her voice carrying clearly. "That I'm unqualified, that I don't belong. You're right. I don't belong. I don't want power for its own sake. I don't want your territories." She moved around the table, meeting each captain's eyes in turn. "What I want is to make sure that when this organization moves, it moves smart. No more internal coups. No more bombs in bedrooms. No more trusted lieutenants selling you out to the highest bidder." She stopped beside Dante. "My father died in your war. I'm here to make sure fewer fathers die in the next one." The captains exchanged glances. Some convinced, some not, all uncertain. But Dante's word was law. They could accept it or leave. Slowly, one by one, they nodded. Antonio raised his glass. "To the new consigliere, may she keep us all alive." "To survival," the room echoed, uncertain but willing. Later, yet Elena stood alone in her new office, a room adjacent to Dante's, connected by a door that locked from her side. She placed a photograph of her father on the desk, his face forever frozen at 42, smiling at a camera she'd held. "I hope you understand, Papa," she whispered. "I hope you'd forgive me." Dante appeared in the doorway, his presence announced by the soft creak of hinges. "He would," Dante said quietly. "A father always wants his daughter to survive. You're surviving." "Am I?" Elena touched the photograph's frame. "Or am I just becoming what killed him?" Dante's answer was honest, stripped of comfort. "Maybe both. But you get to choose what kind of survivor you are." Elena looked past him to the window, the city lights stretching to the horizon. A million stories, a million choices, a million people trying to survive in their own ways. "Then I choose to be the one who remembers," she said. "Who doesn't forget the cost." Dante nodded, understanding. "That's all anyone can do." He left her alone with her father's photograph and her conscience, two weights she'd carry for the rest of her life. The charity gala at Dante's new estate was the kind of event that made the society pages and the FBI surveillance logs simultaneously. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over 200 guests. Politicians glad-handing donors, socialites air-kissing rivals, businessmen discussing deals that would never appear on any ledger. The legitimate face of power, dressed in designer labels and practiced smiles. Dante moved through the crowd with the ease of a man who'd spent decades reading rooms and manipulating outcomes. And he shook the mayor's hand, laughed at the district attorney's joke, promised a substantial donation to the Children's Hospital Fund. The feared boss transformed into a respected businessman, even if whispers still followed in his wake. The ballroom doors opened, and conversations faltered. Elena entered alone, commanding attention without seeking it. She wore an elegant navy gown that Katya had helped her select, its simplicity making her presence more striking, not less. Her hair fell in waves around her shoulders. No excessive jewelry, just a single pendant at her throat, a small frame containing her father's photograph, visible to anyone who looked closely. She wasn't hiding anymore. Dante excused himself from a conversation with a city councilman and crossed the room. "Ms. Volkov, you're late." "I had business in Brighton Beach," Elena replied, accepting the champagne flute he offered. "Community board meeting ran long. They're pushing for a new rec center." "And?" "I approved the funding. It's good for the neighborhood." 6 months had created a rhythm between them that looked effortless, but had been earned through trial and conflict. Elena stood at Dante's right hand, literally as they moved through the gala, and figuratively in the organization's hierarchy. The captains had learned to report to her first. She filtered the noise, assessed the threats, presented Dante with analyzed intelligence rather than raw panic. Her strategies had prevented 3 territorial conflicts, expanded 2 legitimate business ventures, and established Brighton Beach as a model of what organized crime could become when someone cared about more than extraction. The Volkov name meant something again. Not fear, but trust. Not a cautionary tale, but a promise kept. But not everyone had accepted the new order. Antonio found Dante during a lull in the evening, pulling him aside near the library. The older captain's face was troubled. "The men respect her," Antonio said carefully. "But they wonder..." "Wonder what?" Dante's tone was neutral, but his attention sharpened. "If you're going soft, if she's making you weak." Dante studied the man who'd been with him for 18 years. "Strength isn't just violence, Antonio. It's knowing when to fight and when to build. Victor was strong, he's also dead. Elena is strategic. We're thriving." "But..." The conversation was interrupted by one of Yuri's men who approached with urgency barely contained. "Sir, we have a situation." In Dante's private study, away from the gala's glitter, the news was delivered with clinical precision. The Genovese family was pushing into neutral territory near the docks. 3 blocks that served as buffer zone between organizations, testing boundaries, probing for weakness. The traditional response was written in blood and precedent, immediate retaliation. A statement that borders meant something. "Let me talk to them first," Elena said, already pulling out her phone to make calls. "Violence is expensive." Several captains who'd been summoned to the meeting scoffed. "Talk? They'll see it as weakness. They're pushing because they think we're soft after the restructuring." Dante looked at Elena, then at his captains. "Let her try. If negotiation fails, we respond the old way. But we try smart before we try violent." The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon at a neutral restaurant in Queens. Carlo Genovese, underboss of the family, arrived with 2 bodyguards and an expression of barely concealed contempt. "The boss sends a woman?" Carlo sneered as Elena sat across from him. "He must be desperate." Elena's expression didn't change. "He sent his consigliere. If you want to insult someone, Carlo, make sure you know their position first. It prevents embarrassment." She opened a folder, spreading photographs across the table. "You're expanding into the docks because you think we're weak after the coup. You think Dante's restructuring is vulnerability? You're wrong, but I understand the calculation." Carlo's smirk didn't falter. "Aren't you weak? Half your captain's gone, territory ceded to the Russians." "We know about your shipment on Thursday," Elena interrupted. "The one coming through Port Newark. Container SC4471, 40 kilos of heroin from Sicily." Carlo's face changed. The smirk died. "How? We also know about your cash flow problems." Elena slid another document across. "The loan from the Bratva. $2 million at 18% interest. Payment due in 6 weeks. You're expanding because you're desperate, not because you're strong." She pushed a 3rd folder toward him. "Here's what we're offering. Safe passage through our territory for 6 months. No interference, no fees. In exchange, you stay out of the neutral zones and we forget about that shipment." "Why would we take that?" Carlo's voice had lost its confidence. "We could just take the territory." "You could try," Elena agreed. "But you'd lose people fighting us. You'd lose money on prolonged conflict. And the Bratva would call your loan the moment violence disrupted their operations. You'd be fighting a war on 2 fronts while bleeding capital you don't have." She leaned back. "I'm offering you a way out without losing face. You take the deal, tell your boss you negotiated favorable terms, everyone survives. That's smarter than pride." Carlo stared at the intelligence in front of him. Detailed, accurate, damning. He pulled out his phone, stepped away, made a call. When he returned, his expression had shifted. "Test we accept." Elena returned to Dante's estate an hour later, entering the study where the captains had been waiting, uncertain and tense. "Deal completed," she announced. 6-month non-aggression pact. Genovese pulls back from the docks. We provide transit cooperation. No shots fired." The room was silent. Then Antonio spoke, his voice carrying a note Elena had never heard before. Respect. "I didn't think it would work." "Neither did I," Elena admitted, "but it was worth trying before bleeding." Dante addressed his captains, his voice carrying the weight of decree. "This is the new way. Smart before violent, strategic before emotional. Anyone who can't adapt to that should consider early retirement." No one challenged him. That evening, after the guests departed and the staff cleaned away the remnants of the gala, Dante and Elena sat in his private dining room. Just the 2 of them, the first time they'd been truly alone since the night of the bomb. "You've changed things," Dante said, swirling wine in his glass. "The organization, the approach, me." "Is that good or bad?" Elena asked. "It's different. I've spent 20 years ruling through fear. You're teaching me to rule through respect. I'm not sure which is more exhausting." Elena smiled slightly. "Probably respect. Fear is easy. Respect you have to earn." Dante set down his glass. When Victor betrayed me, I thought I'd lost everything. My empire, my legacy, the foundation I'd spent 2 decades building. But you rebuilt. No, Dante corrected. We rebuilt. And it's better than before. Smaller, but stronger. More loyal. More sustainable. My father used to say, a building is only as strong as its foundation. Rebuild the foundation, rebuild the structure. Elena touched the pendant at her throat. He was a smart man. He was. And he'd probably hate that you're here doing this. Every day, I wonder, Elena admitted. Dante leaned forward. Why do you stay? You have Brighton Beach. You could walk away tomorrow, build something completely clean, leave all of this behind. Elena considered the question she'd asked herself 100 times. Because this world exists whether I'm in it or not. My father tried to stay on the edges, be just a contractor, keep his hands relatively clean. He died anyway. She met Dante's eyes. At least here, I have some control. I can choose how we operate. I can choose to do less harm, and even if I can't do no harm. That's not the same thing. I know. But it's better than doing nothing while the Victors and Marcos of the world burn everything down. Dante raised his glass. To Alexei Volkov, who raised a daughter smart enough to save an enemy's life. Elena lifted hers, touching the pendant. To my father, who taught me that honor matters even in a world without it. They drank in silence, 2 people from opposite sides of a tragedy, now building something neither had expected. What happens now? Elena asked. We continue. We build. We try to be better than what came before us. Think it's possible? In this life? Dante smiled. A real smile, not the practiced expression he wore for politicians and rivals. 6 months ago, I would have said no. But you changed my mind. How? You proved that you can come from blood and not be bloodthirsty. You can want revenge and choose justice instead. You can remember the cost and still move forward. A knock at the door interrupted them. One of Yuri's tech specialists appeared, apologetic but urgent. Ms. Volkov, situation developing in Red Hook, needs the consigliere. Elena stood immediately, her demeanor shifting from reflective to operational. Details? As she moved toward the door, already processing information, Dante watched her. The woman who'd been hired to poison him. The daughter of a man he'd killed. The maid who'd whispered, "Don't move," and changed everything. She was the most dangerous person in his organization, not because she was violent, but because she'd made him question everything he'd built. Elena paused at the doorway, glancing back. Still think I'm just a maid, Mr. Moretti? Dante's smile was genuine. No, Mrs. Volkov. I think you're the reason I'm still alive to regret that assumption. She left to handle business. Confident, capable, transformed into something neither assassin nor victim, but something entirely her own. Dante returned to the window, looking out at the city lights stretching to the horizon. His empire was different now. Smaller in territory, but deeper in loyalty. Built not just on fear, but on strategy, on calculated mercy, on the partnership between a man who'd come home to die and a woman who'd saved him instead. The most feared Mafia boss alive had learned something in a workshop full of ghosts. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't in the violence you can inflict, but in the person you're wise enough to trust. And sometimes, the person you underestimate is exactly the one who'll save your life and remake your world.